Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are really plunging into some fascinating places around the Sea of Galilee.
Yeah, site's just packed with history, tradition, and some really compelling biblical stories.
We've got a whole stack of material here, notes, descriptions, readings about specific spots right on the lake.
Mhm.
And our mission really is to unpack all of it. Look at the archaeology, the history, the traditions, and maybe find some, surprising connections.
Absolutely. It's a region where the past isn't just past. It's right there under your feet, sometimes literally, layer upon layer.
Roman, Byzantine, Crusader, Ottoman.
Right, and even modern history leaving its mark. It all shapes how we see these places and the stories tied to them.
And so many key gospel stories are set right here. So where should we start? Maybe Topka.
Kabka is a great starting point. The name itself, Tabka, it likely comes from the Greek heptapego,
Meaning?
7 springs. And we know this name goes way back, at least to the late 4th century. There was this pilgrim, Egeria.
Ah, yes. Egeria's travels, her account is invaluable, isn't it?
Absolutely. She mentions the 7 springs, so it's tied to the natural landscape right from the start.
But it wasn't just a quiet spot with springs, was it? The sources mention roads, trade,
Definitely not just quiet. It was right on the Via Maris.
the Roman road.
Yeah, the main highway connecting places like Tiberias, right there on the lake, up towards Damascus. They found Roman milestones nearby, so we know it was a major route.
And major routes mean.
Tolls, customs, tax collection, you get the picture. Maybe like where Matthew was sitting when he got called.
Right. So the roads themselves tell a story about daily life back then.
Exactly. Infrastructure matters.
Okay, so Tubka. Most people probably know it for the church of the multiplication of loaves and fishes.
That's the big one, yeah. Tied to that miracle in Matthew 14 and the other Gospels too. Jesus feeding the 5,000.
5 loaves, 2 fish, 12 baskets left over. A core story.
And again, Egeria, back in the 4th century, she described visiting the spot. She talks about a grassy field, palm trees, those 7 springs, and crucially, a stone. The stone where tradition said Jesus placed the bread.
So the tradition connecting the miracle to that specific spot is really old.
Very old. Which makes the church history there interesting.
How so?
Well, Egeria saw just a small church. Then it gets bigger in the 5th century, some renovations in the 6th. But then it seems to have been destroyed. Maybe 7th century, Persian invasion, Muslim conquest, somewhere around then.
And then nothing for a long time. No Crusader church?
Apparently not. Unlike other holy sites, the Crusaders didn't seem to build here. So the ruins were kind of lost, buried, until German archaeologists dug them up in the 1930s.
Which led to the modern church we see today, built in 1982.
That's the one. Relatively new, but designed to feel like the old Byzantine church, using clues from the excavations.
And inside, you find things directly pointing back to the story. That rock under the altar.
Ugh, the rock. Believed to be the Mensa Christi, the table of the Lord. The very stone Egeria mentioned. It's naturally pale limestone, but centuries of oil lamps burning nearby have darkened it. It's still the absolute focal point.
Considered the holiest spot in the church.
Right. And then right in front of it, that famous mosaic.
The loaves and fishes mosaic, everyone recognizes that one. Basket, circles for loaves, 2 fish.
But count the loaves in the basket.
Huh. 1, 2, 3, 4. There are only 4. But the story says 5. What's going on there?
Okay, this is where the art gets theological, and it's really fascinating. The common interpretation is that the 5th loaf isn't shown because it's the Eucharist. It's the bread on the altar during Mass.
Ah, so the people attending Mass become part of the miracle?
Exactly. The congregation completes the picture. It's a visual way of saying the miracle continues. And those circles, by the way, they look like ancient pita bread. The Hebrew word lemon bread sounds like the word for circle.
That's clever. What about the fish? Are they the local St. Peter's fish, the tilapia?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But visually, they actually look more like Dora fish from the Nile.
From Egypt. Why?
Well, that detail, plus some other symbols in the mosaics here, and also at sites like Shifta and Abdat down south, they look like nilometers. Things used to measure the Nile's flood level. It suggests maybe the artist, or the pattern book they used, had Egyptian connections. Shows how art styles traveled.
Wow. Even the type of fish tells a story. The gospel also says Jesus gave the food to the disciples first, and they gave it to the crowd. Any particular meaning seen in that?
Yeah, in Catholic interpretation, that's often seen as significant. It emphasizes the role of intermediaries, the apostles, and by extension, the clergy in distributing God's grace or nourishment. It's seen as Jesus setting up that structure.
Different from maybe a more direct connection emphasized elsewhere.
Potentially, yes. It highlights that particular aspect of the story.
So much packed into one small area. Does the church have, like, a courtyard?
It does, an atrium. In Byzantine times, that was often for people interested in Christianity but not yet baptized. Kind of a welcoming space. There's symbolism there too, an olive tree maybe representing the springs, or fish symbols for fertility or Christianity. It's a lovely area, though it was badly damaged by arson in 2015.
Oh, that's terrible.
It was, but thankfully it's been restored very carefully.
You mentioned the sources talk about Dalmanutha nearby.
Yes, it's mentioned in the Gospels, a place Jesus went after another feeding miracle. Pinpointing the exact spot is debated, but there's location nearby on the shore associated with it. Sometimes used for private services outdoors now. Adds another layer to the landscape.
Okay, let's move uphill from Topka. The Mount of Beatitudes.
A beautiful, very serene spot. Traditionally where Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5-7.
Is there an ancient church there too?
There are ruins of a Byzantine church further down the hill, but you can't really get to them these days.
So the church people visit is the one on top.
That's right, the octagonal one. Built by Italian Franciscan sisters maybe 90 years ago. Designed by Antonio Barluzzi, he built a lot of churches in the Holy Land.
And the shape, octagonal, that's deliberate.
Very much so. 8 sides for the 8 Beatitudes of Matthew's Gospel. Blessed are the poor in spirit, and so on.
Though Luke's version has fewer Beatitudes, right?
It does, but the design clearly references Matthew here.
Yes.
Also, octagons were sometimes used for Roman memorials, so it kind of echoes that tradition too. Multiple layers of meaning in the shape.
Now, unlike Tabqa or other places, Barluzzi didn't build over ancient ruins on that specific hilltop spot, did he?
No, there weren't significant archaeological finds right there on the summit. So he did something really smart.
What was that?
He focused on the view, the landscape. He designed the church with big windows looking out over the Sea of Galilee and the hills. The idea is you stand inside and see the same vista Jesus would have seen when he was teaching.
So the architecture connects you directly to the setting.
Exactly. Since he couldn't connect you to ancient stones right there, he connected you to the ancient landscape through the windows. Very effective.
I read something about the original floor mosaic having a dedication.
Ah, yes. A sign of the times it was built. Being an Italian project, the original floor had a mosaic dedication to Mussolini. That was, understandably, removed later on. Politics and piety can get intertwined.
A reminder of how history impacts these sites. When you visit, it's worth walking around inside to see all those views.
Definitely. That's part of the experience Barluzzi intended.
Okay, let's head down towards the shore again, to Capernaum, described as Jesus' own town.
Yeah, his home base for his ministry after leaving Nazareth, according to the Gospels. Hugely important site.
And today it's divided.
Right. Part is managed by the Franciscans, Catholics, and part by the Greek Orthodox. It goes back to land purchases, especially in the Ottoman era. It's significant for Christians, obviously, but also really interesting for Jewish history because of the archaeology.
And the most striking thing you see is that big white synagogue.
It really stands out. But here's a puzzle. That synagogue, the beautiful one you see, it's dated to the late 4th century CE.
So hundreds of years after Jesus.
Exactly, based on coins found right in the foundations.
But the Gospels clearly say Jesus taught in the synagogue in Capernaum.
Correct. So the prevailing theory, the one most scholars lean towards, is that this later, grander synagogue was built deliberately, directly on top of the foundations of the earlier 1st century synagogue, the one Jesus would have known.
Can they prove there was an earlier one underneath?
Archaeologically, it's tough to get absolute proof without dismantling the later one, which obviously isn't going to happen. But you could see an earlier floor level beneath parts of the 4th century structure. It strongly suggests an earlier building was there.
So you're standing in the right place, just not in the original building.
That seems to be the idea, a continuity of the sacred space. The synagogue itself is impressive, big basilica shape, like others from that Byzantine period, places like Barham or Marin.
And the entrance design is typical too.
Yes, often you'd enter from the north, but then you'd turn south towards Jerusalem for prayer. Maybe that physical turn helped people focus, shift from outside worries to prayer.
Did synagogues back then have things like a permanent ark for the scrolls or separate sections for women?
Not typically in this period, or at least not built-in structures like you see later. There's no clear evidence here for a permanent ark fixture or a dedicated women's gallery in the 4th century building.
Yeah.
Those developed more formally later.
What's really unique about Capernaum, though, is having this big synagogue right next door to another major site, St. Peter's House, which became a church.
That proximity is extraordinary. You just don't find that anywhere else in Israel from this period, a major synagogue and a major venerated Christian holy site basically touching each other.
So how did that happen? What are the theories?
Well, there are two main lines of thought. One is maybe there was just an unusual level of tolerance here. Jews, including Jewish Christians, or minim as they were sometimes called, and Gentile Christians just coexisted, lived and worshipped side by side.
A pocket of tolerance.
Perhaps. The other theory, put forward by scholar Rena Telgum, is a bit more provocative. She suggests maybe the big 4th century synagogue wasn't primarily for a large local Jewish community anymore. Maybe that community had shrunk as the area became more Christian. Instead, she argues maybe it was built partly or even mainly as a draw for Christian pilgrims.
Like a tourist site. Come see the synagogue where Jesus preached.
Sort of. In an increasingly Christian region, maybe wealthy patrons, Jewish or possibly even Christian, funded this impressive reconstruction on the traditional site because pilgrims wanted to see it. It's a fascinating debate. Tolerance or early religious tourism. We should report both views.
There was still a prosperous Jewish community around, though.
Oh, yes. We have inscriptions from other places, like the hot springs at Hamat Gader, that mention prominent Jews from Capernaum. So the community was definitely established and had means.
And some carvings found nearby are thought to be from the synagogue.
That's right. Decorative pieces. Things like menorahs, the 7-branch candelabra, representations of the Holy Ark, sometimes shown on wheels, which is interesting.
Suggesting it was portable?
Maybe, or maybe just a stylistic choice. You also find symbols that were common in the broader culture, sometimes used by Jews and non-Jews, like the 6-pointed Star of David or the 5-pointed Star of Solomon, and even things like a vessel with grapes, which also became a Christian symbol. It reflects the mixed visual culture.
Okay, let's shift focus to that building right next door, St. Peter's house, where Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law.
The archaeology here is really compelling for early Christian history. It starts as a simple house, typical 1st century dwelling, but then very early, late 1st century, maybe early 2nd, something changes.
What kind of change?
The walls of one main room get plastered and painted white. There's evidence of frescoes. They find lots of broken pottery, especially oil lamps, concentrated there, almost like they were purposefully placed in the floor. The layout changes, becomes less like a family home and more like a central meeting room.
Suggesting it was being used differently, for gatherings.
Exactly. And the clincher is the graffiti, over 100 inscriptions scratched into the plaster.
What do they say?
They're in Greek, Aramaic, Syriac, Latin, and they mention Jesus, Lord, Christ, Messiah, and Peter, plus prayers like Amen. It's clear evidence this specific room was being used as a place of Christian prayer and veneration extremely early on.
Wow, that's direct evidence. And Egeria mentions this place too.
She does. In the late 4th century, she writes about visiting the Domus Ecclesia, the house church in Capernaum where Peter's house had been. So the tradition identifying this specific spot was continuous and well established. Later in the 5th century, they built a big octagonal church right over these house ruins.
Protecting the original site.
Right. And then the modern Catholic Church, built in 1990, does something clever.
The glass.
Yes. It's built on pillars above the ruins with a large glass floor in the middle. So you can stand inside the modern church and look straight down onto the walls of Peter's original house and the outline of the Byzantine octagonal church built over it. You see the layers without disturbing them.
A powerful way to connect. The sources use a Latin term for this area, insula sacra.
Yes, sacred island. Because in the 4th century, they actually built a perimeter wall around this house complex, separating it from the rest of the town's houses.
Yeah.
It physically marked it off as special, sacred.
So Capernaum itself had a long history before and after Jesus.
It did. People lived there from maybe the 2nd century BCE. Interestingly, it seems to have survived the first Jewish revolt around 70 CE, unlike Magdala down the road. But a massive earthquake in 749 CE seems to have devastated it. It was mostly abandoned by the 10th century, so its rediscovery much later was almost accidental.
Just down the shore from Capernaum, there's another spot linked to Peter, isn't there? The Church of St. Peter's Primacy.
Right, sometimes called Little Topka. This one is really important in Catholic tradition. It's linked to the story in John 21 after the resurrection. Jesus appears by the shore, they have breakfast.
Charcoal fire.
Exactly. And Jesus asks Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" and tells him, "Feed my sheep."
Which is seen as reinstating Peter after his denials and giving him leadership.
Precisely. For Catholics, this is the moment Jesus commissions Peter as head of the church, the foundation for papal authority. So it's a site with deep theological weight. And it's nice because, unlike some sites set back from the water, here you can actually walk right down to the lake. Can't swim, but you can touch the water.
In that John 21 story, Jesus tells them to cast the net on the right side of the boat, and they catch tons of fish. Is there anything special about that instruction here?
Well, beyond the symbolism of right, meaning good or correct, fishermen have known for ages that there's a warm spring entering the lake right near this spot.
And fish like warmer water.
Often, yes. So telling them to cast on the right side at this location might have also been practical advice based on local knowledge, where the fish were likely gathering. It's a neat convergence of the story and the environment.
And there's another rock, a Mensa Christi.
Yes, another table of Christ, right at the water's edge, believed to be where they had that breakfast. You'll also see some distinctive white, heart-shaped stones on the shore.
What are they?
Tradition connects them to the disciples sitting there. Maybe 6 stones for the 6 disciples present beside Peter, or maybe seats for judging the tribes in the future. They're thought to be Byzantine era.
And a modern statue of Peter, too.
Yep, showing him with the keys and shepherd's staff, often with the St. Peter's fish. Like the Multiplication Church, this site also had earlier churches Byzantine, maybe started by St. Helena, that were ruined and rebuilt. The current one is from the 1930s.
Okay, let's move south now to Magdala, hometown of Mary Magdalene.
Magdala, its ancient name, Tarikie, tells you what it was famous for, salted fish. It was a big fishing and fish processing center, and it's seen some incredible archaeology recently.
Its history during the Jewish revolt against Rome was pretty dramatic.
Very. Josephus Flavius, the historian, wrote about it. He fortified it, but the Romans captured it brutally around 70 CE. Horrific fighting, even out on the lake. It was basically wiped out as a major town then.
And the modern discovery was almost accidental.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
A Catholic group from Mexico bought land there in the 2000s, aiming to build a retreat center. They knew it was ancient Magdala, but when they started digging in 2006, bang, they hit a synagogue almost immediately.
And this synagogue is different from the one in Capernaum, older.
Much older. This one is from the 1st century CE, the Second Temple period. It was in use while the temple in Jerusalem was still standing. That's huge.
How were synagogues different back then?
They were more like community centers, places to gather, read, and study Torah, discuss things. Prayer happened, but the temple was still the main focus for sacrificial worship and pilgrimage. Finding a synagogue from this early period is really rare.
Is there any proof Jesus preached in this specific synagogue?
No direct proof, no mention in the Gospels, but Magdala was a major town on the main road from Capernaum going south. Jesus traveled that road. It's highly likely he would have passed through, maybe visited, maybe even spoken there. Plausible, but not certain.
But the definite connection is Mary Magdalene.
Absolutely. Her name literally means Mary from Magdala. She's such a key figure follower, witness at the cross, first witness of the resurrection, finding her hometown and a synagogue from her time. That's incredibly powerful, especially for Christians.
What else did they find in this synagogue area?
Remnants of the original mosaic floor, frescoes on the walls again, super rare for a 1st century synagogue. They also found parts of the town like fish ponds and a really interesting mikveh, a ritual bath.
What was unique about the mikveh?
It used fresh groundwater bubbling up from an aquifer near the lake, not the usual rainwater or spring water. Quite sophisticated.
They found a coin.
Yes, a coin dated 29 CE, found right there in the synagogue complex. It's amazing to think. Could Mary Magdalene have touched that coin? Could Peter? Could Jesus? It connects you right back to that time. Magdala's fascinating because it resonates so strongly for both Jews, one of the oldest synagogues found, and Christians, as Mary's home.
The star find, though, has to be the Magdala stone.
Oh, definitely. Found right in the middle of the synagogue. It's unique. A carved stone block.
What's carved on it?
A clear menorah, one of the oldest depictions found in a synagogue context.
Yeah.
A rosette symbol, which has kind of become Magdala's emblem, and maybe something that looks like chariot wheels, possibly representing Elijah's ascent.
What was it used for?
The best guess is maybe a table or stand for reading the Torah scroll or studying it. Nothing quite like it has been found anywhere else from that period. The original's in Jerusalem now, but they have excellent replicas at the site.
Magdala also has a very modern church, Duke in Ultim.
Yes, put out into the deep. From the fishing story, it's really beautiful and very intentionally designed.
How so?
There's a strong focus on women, honoring Mary Magdalene. Inside the main chapel, the altar is shaped like a boat, facing the Sea of Galilee. It's meant to feel like you're on the shore listening to Jesus teach from a boat.
That's evocative.
It really is. There are also side chapels, and one called the Women's Atrium has pillars honoring women from the Gospels, and one pillar is left blank, symbolizing all women.
And the icons inside are unique, too.
Yeah, they show the 12 disciples, but importantly, they include Judas holding his bag of silver but without a halo. It depicts them before the final betrayal as the group Jesus chose. And Mary, Jesus' mother, is shown as a contemporary figure without the baby. Also in the complex, they have some ancient Byzantine baptismal fonts displayed. Though the one you see was brought from elsewhere, it shows the style used for adult immersion.
So pulling it all together, Tabqa, Beatitudes, Capernaum, Peter's Primacy, Magdala, you really see the connections, the road linking them, the shared landscape.
And the recurring themes just jump out at you. Bread and fish, Peter's role popping up again and again, Capernaum as Jesus' hub, Mary Magdalene's significance, and the thread of pilgrimage starting way back with Egeria, plus those layers of history, Roman, Byzantine, destruction, rediscovery.
It's that mix of archaeology, tradition, and faith, isn't it? Sometimes confirming each other, sometimes creating
I-
questions.
Each site gives us something unique. The 4th century synagogue over a possible 1st century one in Capernaum. The incredibly rare 1st century synagogue and that amazing stone in Magdala. The theological depth of the mosaic at Tabqa. The symbolic architecture of Beatitudes. The graffiti proof at Peter's house. The blend of story and nature at Peter's Primacy.
It really shows how ordinary places, a shoreline, a house foundation, a rock, can gather so much meaning over time.
They become these sacred islands, the insuli sacri, set apart not just physically sometimes, but in our minds, loaded with history, belief, debate.
And exploring them means engaging with all those layers, realizing how one spot can mean different things to different people, Jewish history, Christian faith, just fascination with the past.
It definitely gives you a deep appreciation for how places and stories intertwine and endure.
It really does. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive around the Sea of Galilee.